Now, the long-awaited KZN ANC elective conference gets underway this morning. Analysts say the provincial outcomes will directly impact the national conference. Current chair Fikile Vilakazi goes up against finance MEC Nomusa Durban and businessman Sandile Zungu. Let's discuss this now with political analyst Fikile Vilakazi. Ms. Vilakazi, good morning and thank you very much for your time. A very interesting time in KZN, perhaps to start with the proliferation of candidates. I mean, in the other provinces, we've seen one or two for particularly that chair position, but here we've seen as many as four or even slightly more. We really don't know. What is this indicative of? What exactly does it mean?
Good morning to you and good morning to the viewers at home. You know, the fact that we are seeing in KwaZulu-Natal the rising numbers of people challenging the position of the chairpersonship is really a historical development, in a sense that KwaZulu-Natal has been a province, amongst others, around the issues of the African National Congress that has been highly divided, that has been fighting, you know, amongst itself, even to a point of death where we have seen people and bodies falling and dying. So this indicates then the fact that people are wanting to change, and they want to also occupy positions of leadership to be able to push their own individual agendas, but also the agendas of their own factions. And you would remember that in the 8th provincial conference, Fikile Vilakazi actually was really not highly contested. And this shows you, you know, from then and now, the levels of divisions that are deepening themselves within the ANC, but also the levels of commitment within the members of the African National Congress to say we really need to change. We need to see something that is new. We need to shift ourselves from the kind of the ANC that we know, also because that kind of an ANC is no longer what it was, you know, when we entered the liberation struggle, and also when we transition from apartheid to democracy. A lot of the character of the African National Congress has been lost. So people are contesting. Sandile Zungu, for example, represents that kind of newness, who is really coming from the business sector. He has been out of the province for a while, coming back home to say, I would like to bring change here. I do not carry a cloud of, you know, this kind of toxic history that is surrounding a number of leaders within the ANC, and perhaps I could be one of the people that takes us into a different era of newness, perhaps an era of renewal, and perhaps an era of radical economic transformation, in terms of a radical economic transformation being not just an ideological issue, but a symbolic issue and a real issue for people, perhaps taking people towards social entrepreneurships, people towards business opportunities, and so on. So there is that. But also you are seeing abantu like Fikile Vilakazi holding on, right? Fikile Vilakazi is really framed within the agenda of newness as well, supporting President Cyril Ramaphosa, the agenda of renewal. And he has got a lot of support because he was not contested highly. So he may be able to retain it, but it's not going to be as easy as it was in the 8th provincial conference. But then there's a dynamic also of Ilwenduzana agenda, Umama Unomusa Durban and there are other names like Umama Peggy Nkonyeni coming up from the eThekwini region in particular, who are saying we want to see the leadership of women rising, but people are also saying we want to see the leadership of young people, youth in particular. The Youth League is very, very strong and is fighting to say we want to change this culture of ageism within the organization. We need to see the young people rising and really coming in to lead us. So they're supporting people like Umtolo, for example, as well, in the position of the Secretary General. So there is high contestation, and it could be really a symbolic expression of saying something has got to change. We may not necessarily have a clear agenda on how that thing needs to change, but we need a new ANC of some kind, and it could be an attempt that tells us that.
I listened to Mdumiseni Ntuli yesterday. He was actually discouraging the preoccupation with leadership. But how possible is it? I've also heard Thabo Mbeki on several occasions saying, let's do away with this preoccupation of who will lead us, who will lead us. Let's get back to our core, which is to service, because it serves us as distraction if we're constantly thinking about who will succeed whom. But is it really, really possible at this point? Because it seems if people are talking about a much anticipated conference, they're talking about the leadership and particularly the chair position.
Yeah. You know, I think that is not easy. President Thabo Mbeki spoke about this as well, you know, in the memorial service, Mama Ujesi Duwat, touching on this dynamic that has emerged within the African National Congress, saying that, for example, over the years and over time, the ANC changed. The kind of people that were attracted to the ANC are the ones that really needed jobs, are the ones that needed a economic life, are the ones that needed a particular career. So it was no longer the cadre, for instance, that was committed and remains committed to the National Democratic Revolution, which was really the agenda that was leading the liberation struggle. And that is what is happening here. It is not possible to then ask people to say, stop being preoccupied about leadership positions, because that's the only way really within the African National Congress people can have access to employability, people can have access to resources, because they become closer to the tax base in the country, they become closer to the tender processes and to influencing also financial and political decisions within the state. And so it's quite it's sort of a vehicle for many people to do. And we saw this happening from the 90s, you know, and the early 2000s within the student movement, particularly ISASCO, within universities and institutions of higher learning, where young people who were leading SASCO were really shifting from the agenda of National Democratic Revolution, really saying, I just want to be a member of SASCO, a president of SASCO, because that guarantees me a particular position into the hierarchy of the leadership of the ANC. And of course, a guaranteed job, a guaranteed income as I grow, guaranteed access to all kinds of tenders and opportunities, which is highly sad and problematic. So it's difficult to really honor the request that former President Thabo Mbeki is making, as much as it is a real request.
Could some from a different persuasion be perhaps somewhat accurate if they said the preoccupation with the personalities or whom ascends is very important in the ANC of now, because it seems they're so divided, even insofar as their ideology is concerned, that it matters who is at the helm, because you know the kind of policies they would prioritize or where they would direct or redirect the African National Congress. Would you share the same sentiments, or no? It should be an ANC that has policies that can be implemented by any leader who's at the top.
Ideally, you know, any healthy organization should have a particular organizational culture that can easily be taken by anyone who emerges into a position of leadership, right? That when you talk about healthy systems of governance, healthy organizational management and running of organizations, so there should be a particular vision that drives everybody to say, it doesn't matter what faction you comes from, but this is our agenda, this is what we are pushing, this is our vision. And I think in the absence of that clarity of vision for the country, in terms of how do we lift ourselves from the state of poverty, how do we lift ourselves from the state of coloniality, really, because we are still sort of a colonized nation, how do we lift ourselves from the psyche of apartheid? There is no clear national agenda. There is no clear agenda even within the African National Congress. And in the absence of such, you find that then people would then go into these factions, into these different slates, because these different slates are trying to imagine, at the center of their imagination, they're looking at that particular alternative that perhaps can shape that narrative that can take us to that place of a possible, you know, a national agenda that lifts us from the sadness that we are in. So that is the situation. So now everybody will want to put bodies of people that they see as possibilities that can take them to that particular place where they want to go to. So in a situation where an organizational vision is divided, where organizational culture is crumbling like it is within the African National Congress, of course people are going to garner for bodies that will stand for their ideological framework, will support their ideological standpoints, and will push their agenda, you know, in various structures in the hierarchy.
Just in closing, can you locate the former president, Jacob Zuma, in this contest right now? Because from the outside looking in, it's as though all of the candidates have regard for the former president. So it goes beyond what we've seen in other provinces where they would be saying there's great division. It's either a slate that is more sympathetic to a Zumalan faction or a slate more aligned to the Cyril Ramaphosa faction. But in KwaZulu-Natal, it seems as a starting point, but you could correct me, is that they have great regard for the former president, but now there are regional dynamics that maybe some of us might not really appreciate, that perhaps sways certain members towards a particular candidate. If this is indeed the case, can you just talk to us about those dynamics that exist regionally?
It's quite a hard one, you know, in the province. You know, the symbolism of Ubaba, or former President Jacob Zuma, remains very strong in the province, right? He is a figure that is highly respected as an elder in the political sphere of the African National Congress, in particular in KwaZulu-Natal, similarly as people like Utokotela Uzweli Mkhize, which is why you are seeing, for example, Umama Unomusa Dubeka-Ncube, you know, as she is campaigning towards this position of chairpersonship, she's encouraging everyone who is looking at taking the leadership ranks within the ANC to maintain the connection and the linkages with the eldership of particularly Ubaba Jacob Gedleyihlekisa Zuma. So there is that connection, there is that attraction that continues itself here, because he is seen as that symbolism to say he needs to anoint people in a particular way. You know, there's some charisma that he carries, whether that charisma is seen as toxic by some. You know, the province of KwaZulu-Natal continues to enjoy it. The leadership of the province has been to Nkandla recently to go to a prayer, for example. You know, and they continue to do these visitations to Nkandla to speak and engage with the former president, and that shows you how much his views and his style of leadership, also his strength and his power in the province is still seeing itself. He may not necessarily be present at the conference in his body, but in terms of spirit, because this is a spiritual revolution as well, in terms of spirit, people like Boshembe, you know, the traditionalists in Amakosi and so on, really still believe in him as a particular leader. And these are values that are very strong within the African National Congress in the province. So there's still that. He carries that in the province. And even if we see different factions that are swaying towards President Cyril Ramaphosa, it's still a battle, you know, it's still a battle. This is why you have very few numbers here in the province that are advocating for the agenda of renewal and openly speak about their support for President Cyril Ramaphosa, because there are people what's the word, are torn, right? There is that thing of being torn to say, could it be that perhaps Msholozi can come back and perhaps lead us again? You know, even possibilities of getting him back into presidency. Because I recall when the Pala scandal came out in the public domain, some people were saying, thank goodness Msholozi has been vindicated. You know, others even publicly saying messages of, we apologize to you, Msholozi, all along, you know, you have been treated badly. So there is that tempo here, there is that texture here that is sitting, and I think it is going to play itself within the provincial conference, even you know, symbolically speaking, and in terms of spiritual presence of the former President Jacob Zuma, because of those conversations. Usandile Zungu has been to consult with the president, the former president, for example, you know, and I'm very sure Umama Unomusa Dube has done that as well. The premier Fikile Vilakazi also was in the prayer session there. So there's, you know, there's that, and it's a reality. It's a political reality of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal.
All right. Ms. Vilakazi, thank you very much for the insightful conversation. That's political analyst Fikile Vilakazi.